In Chapter 3, *In of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, you should include annotations over the following three literary elements. One, characterization of George and Lenny. So you are looking at what and or who does Steinbeck use to develop each of these characters, which is also what we did in Chapter 2. The second literary element you're annotating over is diction. So, what words does Steinbeck use to create the mood and develop the characters in this chapter? You should highlight specific words that communicate something about the mood or a character's thoughts and or feelings. Your annotation should be related to what is communicated through those words. The third literary element you're annotating for is repetition. You need to look for words, ideas, and structures that are repeated throughout the chapter or that you recognize from any of the other chapters. Okay, let's begin the reading of Chapter 3 in Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. And remember, I'm going to stop every so often just to kind of let you annotate, highlight, point out important things that may be helpful for your annotations and also for in-class discussions. Okay, let's get started. Although there was evening brightness showing through the windows of the bunkhouse, inside it was dusk. Through the open door came the thuds and occasional clangs of a horseshoe game, and now and then the sound of voices raised in approval or derision. Slim and George came into the darkening bunkhouse together. Slim reached up over the card table and turned on the tin-shaded electric light. Instantly the table was brilliant with light, and the cone of the shade threw its brightness straight downward, leaving the corners of the bunkhouse still in dusk. Slim sat down on a box, and George took his place opposite. "It wasn't nothing," said Slim. "I would have had to drown most of 'em anyways. No need to thank me about that." George said, "It wasn't much to you, maybe, but it was a hell of a lot to him. Man, I don't know how we're going to get him to sleep in here. He'll want to sleep right out in the barn with 'em. We'll have trouble keeping him from getting right in the box with them pups." "It wasn't nothing," Slim repeated. "Say, you sure was right about him. Maybe he ain't bright, but I never seen such a worker. He darn near killed his partner bucking barley. There ain't nobody can keep up with him. Gosh almighty, I never seen such a strong guy." George spoke proudly. "Just tell Lenny what to do, and he'll do it if it don't take no figuring. He can't think of nothing to do himself, but he sure can take orders." There was a clang of horseshoe on iron stake outside and a little cheer of voices. Slim moved back slightly so the light was not on his face. "Funny how you and him string along together." It was Slim's calm invitation to confidence. "What's funny about it?" George demanded defensively. "Oh, I don't know. Hardly none of the guys ever travel together. I hardly never seen two guys travel together. You know how the hands are. They just come in and get their bunk and work a month, and then they quit and go out alone. Never seem to give a darn about nobody. It just seems kind of funny a cuckoo like him and a smart little guy like you traveling together." "He ain't no cuckoo," said George. "He's dumb as hell, but he ain't crazy, and I ain't so bright neither, or I wouldn't be bucking barley for my 50 and pound. If I was bright, if I was even a little bit smart, I'd have my own little place, and I'd be bringing in my own crops, 'stead of doing all the work and not getting what comes up out of the ground." George fell silent. He wanted to talk. Slim neither encouraged nor discouraged him. He just sat back quiet and receptive. I'm going to pause here. So think about the 2 pages that we just read and George's information that he gives about Lenny, and then Slim's reaction to George and Lenny traveling together. So just take a look, go back and make some annotations and think about what do we know? What's your opinion now of George and of Lenny? And then you should be forming an opinion about Slim as well. Okay, I'm going to continue. "It ain't so funny, him and me going around together," George said at last. "Him and me was both born in Auburn. I knowed his Aunt Clara. She took him when he was a baby and raised him up. When his Aunt Clara died, Lenny just come along with me out working. Got kind of used to each other after a little while. Now what I'm thinking is, well, Why did Aunt Clara raise him when he was a baby? I'm sorry if you hear the dogs barking. So why did Aunt Clara take him? What do you think happened with Lenny's parents? Why they weren't the ones that raised him? Okay. Um, said Slim. George looked over at Slim and saw the calm, godlike eyes fastened on him now. Funny, said George. I used to have a hell of a lot of fun with him. Used to play jokes on him because he was too dumb to take care of himself. But he was too dumb even to know he had a joke played on him. I had fun. Made me seem gosh darn smart alongside of him. Why, he'd do any darn thing I told us. If I told him to walk over a cliff, over he'd go. That wasn't so darn much fun after a while. He never got mad about it, neither. I beat the hell out of him, and he could have bust every bone in my body just with his hands. But he never lifted a finger against me. George's voice was taking on the tone of confession. Tell you what made me stop that. One day, a bunch of guys was standing around up on the Sacramento River. I was feeling pretty smart. I turns to Lenny and says, "Jump in." And he jumps. Couldn't swim a stroke. He darn near drowned before we could get him, and he was so darn nice to me for pulling him out. Clean forgot I told him to jump in. Well, I ain't done nothing like that no more. Also, if you notice, I'm sorry, I'm pausing. If you notice with the pronunciation of the words, just like with contractions, we put an apostrophe to signify the missing letter. That's exactly how these words should be read. When you see an apostrophe, if we look at the word feelin, Feelin apostrophe, normally it would be feeling, Feeling, but because we have that G taken off, we've got the apostrophe to replace that. Okay? All right. Well, I ain't done nothing like that no more. He's a nice fella, said Slim. Guy don't need no sense to be a nice fella. Seems to me sometimes it just works the other way around. Take a real smart guy, and he ain't hardly ever a nice fella. George stacked the scattered cards and began to lay out his solitaire hand. The shoes thudded on the ground outside. At the windows, the light of the evening still made the window squares bright. I ain't got no people, George said. I seen the guys that go around on the ranches alone. That ain't no good. They don't have no fun. After a long time, they get mean. They get wanting to fight all the time. Yeah, they get mean, Slim agreed. They get so they don't want to talk to nobody. Course, Lenny's a gosh darn nuisance most of the time, said George. But you get used to going around with a guy, and you can't get rid of him. He ain't mean, said Slim. I can see Lenny ain't a bit mean. Course he ain't mean, but he gets in trouble all the time because he's so gosh darn dumb. Like what happened in Weed. He stopped in the middle of turning over a card. He looked alarmed and peered over at Slim. You wouldn't tell nobody. What'd he do in Weed? Slim asked calmly. You wouldn't tell. No, course you wouldn't. What'd he do in Weed? Slim asked again. Well, he seen this girl in a red dress. Dumb guy like he is, he wants to touch everything he likes, just wants to feel it. So he reaches out to feel this red dress, and the girl lets out a squawk, and that gets Lenny all mixed up, and he holds on because that's the only thing he can think to do. Well, this girl squawks and squawks. I was just a little bit off, and I heard all the yelling, so I comes running, and by that time, Lenny's so scared all he can think to do is just hold on. I socked him over the head with a fence picket to make him let go. He was so scared he couldn't let go of that dress, and he's so gosh darn strong, you know. Slim's eyes were level and unwinking. He nodded very slowly. So what happens? George carefully built his line of solitaire cards. Well, that girl rabbits in and tells the law she been raped. The guys in Weed start a party out to lynch Lenny. So we sit in an irrigation ditch underwater all the rest of the day. Got on your head sticking out of water and up under the grass that sticks out from the side of the ditch, and that night we scrammed out of there. Slim sat in silence for a moment. Didn't hurt that girl none, huh? He asked finally. Hell no. He just scared her. I'd be scared too if he grabbed me. But he never hurt her. He just wanted to touch that red dress. like he wants to pet them pups all the time. He ain't mean, said Slim. I can tell a mean guy a mile off. Course he ain't, and he'll do any darn thing I. Lenny came in through the door. He wore his blue denim coat over his shoulders like a cape, and he walked hunched way over. Hi, Lenny, said George. How'd you like the pup now? Lenny said breathlessly, He's brown and white, just like I wanted. He went directly to his bunk and lay down and turned his face to the wall and drew up his knees. George put down his cards very deliberately. Lenny, he said sharply. Lenny twisted his neck and looked over his shoulder. Huh? What do you want, George? I told you couldn't bring that pup in here. What pup, George? I ain't got no pup. George went quickly to him, grabbed him by the shoulder, and rolled him over. He reached down and picked the tiny puppy from where Lenny had been concealing it against his stomach. Lenny sat up quickly. Give him to me, George. George said, You get right up and take this pup back to the nest. He's got to sleep with his mother. You want to kill him? Just born last night and you take him out of the nest? You take him back or I'll tell Slim not to let you have him. Lenny held out his hands pleadingly. Give him to me, George. I'll take him back. I didn't mean no harm, George. Honest, I didn't. I just wanted to pet him a little. George handed the pup to him. All right, you get him back there quick, and don't you take him out no more. You'll kill him the first thing you know. Lenny fairly scuttled out of the room. Slim had not moved. His calm eyes followed Lenny out the door. Man, he said, he's just like a kid, ain't he? Sure, he's just like a kid. There ain't no more harm in him than a kid neither, except he's so strong. I bet he won't come in here to sleep tonight. He'd sleep right alongside that box in the barn. Well, let him. He ain't doing no harm out there. It was almost dark outside now. Old Candy, the swamper, came in and went to his bunk. And behind him struggled his old dog. Hello, Slim. Hello, George. Didn't either of you play horseshoes? I don't like to play every night, said Slim. Candy went on. So now we have Candy's name instead of Old Swamper. We have his name as Candy. Candy went on. Either you guys got a slug of whiskey? I got a gut ache. I ain't, said Slim. I'd drink it myself if I had, and I ain't got a gut ache neither. Okay, this is going to be the end of part 1. What I want you to do is go back to the previous page. And if you look at, the 2 pages before, where George starts describing what happened in Weed, okay, and then right before that, look at the diction, which remember when we say diction, it refers to the word choice of the author. Okay, so what is the mood that gets created here right before he talks about Weed? And then even throughout him telling this story, what's the mood? What are you thinking? What do you think that Slim is thinking as he's hearing this story? Okay. We also have some lines in this first part regarding Lenny that have been repeated. So I want you to go back, look at what Slim says and what George says repeatedly about Lenny. The line is mentioned 3 or 4 times. Okay, so this is important to the characterization of Lenny and how we see his character being developed and the opinions formed about Lenny. Okay, and this concludes chapter 3, part 1.